It's time for pure performance.
Get your stopwatches ready. It's time for Pure Performance with Andy Grabner and Brian Wilson. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Pure Performance. My name is Brian Wilson, and as always, I have with me my wonderful and lovely, beautiful and talented and smiling co-host, Andy Grabner, today. How you doing, Andy?
It's amazing. All these, I'm good, but all of these attributes, they keep getting longer and longer. And I think, I'm not sure if you are just doing this because you want to play nice because Christmas is coming and you're giving me an early Christmas present. I don't know.
Well, yes, that's exactly what it is. But it could be the fact that I just had a double espresso before we recorded. Mm-hmm. So one of the two. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah.
Or just to make everyone think this is a new video, so it's not recording. It's not pre-recorded parts.
Yes. And now we actually show that we didn't brief our guest well enough because he started talking, even though we haven't yet given him a chance to actually welcome him on the stage. But William, this is perfect because
he's very eager to get started because he's got a lot of great stuff to talk about.
Exactly, and that's also how I remember him. And I want to just quickly say one or two words. I remembered years ago when I started in the observability space. And for me, tracing was everything that existed in my life, right? Because at Dynatrace 20 years ago, this is what we did. And then I met William at a conference, really nice conversations. But at some point he said, these traces, you're doing this all wrong with observability. I've done this before, but you need to look at signals and you need to look at other things. And I was like, wow, he's like challenging me and he's like kind of like destroying my world. And now years later, we keep meeting each other off and on. Sometimes years pass, and then I see another posting from him. And William, I'm not sure if you remember, but sometimes when I see a posting out of the blue, and you are commenting on one of my posts, then I sometimes say it's good to know that you're still around, which is really good. Yes. But now, without further ado, William, thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you for responding to some of those posts that we do, challenging us. And the last one that you posted, I think it was about a month or so ago, I then said, now it's really time to get you on the podcast. So now I want to give it over to you. Can you quickly explain to the audience who is William Louth? Who are you? What drives you? What's your background? And then I want to dive into the whole reason why you have a different opinion on the state of observability.
Yeah. Okay, so William Louth, I'm Irish. I live in Holland, and worked a lot for American companies in the early stage. But I think looking at my 30 years of engineering, which is really, I've done every job there is, like from always architectural, probably site reliability, architect, observability, profiling tools. I think up and down the stack. But probably the best way to look at my career is that there's three phases to it. The first phase was helping in telecommunications. So I came from a telecommunications background, building distributed systems for telecommunications, a lot of Corporate technology. Iona, worked for Borland, did a lot of Observer technology. While working at Borland in the R&D, kind of where they would send me out, because I was probably they just felt William was the most representative person they can send from R&D. For the Observers, I would do a lot of due diligence, architectural reviews, performance on-site investigations. And there I had to use tooling. And that's actually got me into it. So when I joined Borland, there was two parts of the company. There's the tooling company like JBuilder and the other tools there. And then there was the runtime systems, the application servers, Corporate technology, middleware. And I was in that group. And I was always consulting there. So I then decided, after a while of pitching various products to Borland, and the last one I pitched, actually there was two. There was App Simulator, which was probably a forerunner for what eventually became like Kubernetes and the cloud and AWS. It was a very service-oriented, because during my time at AppServer and working on the AppServer, I felt our scaling issues was we couldn't change the environment quick enough. And I was involved in the EC perf, which is one of these benchmarks that we have to prove which was the fastest application server or which one had the greatest throughput. And I had problems trying to find out what was the ideal setting and how to scale out the machines to different configurations. And that was when I came about App Simulator. But during that time, I also came up with a product. I'd been reading a book on complex event processing called Power of Events, and I decided, hey, I want to build something else in the middleware space. I'd worked on another product called VisiCache, which was a distributed cache before coherence came along. And I said, okay, let's call it Java Enterprise Event Processing Platform. I pitched it to Borland. They said, no, it's another one of your 10-year projects. Well, another one of, I wouldn't say it would take 10 years, but it was going to be 10 years before someone would actually want it. And that was probably the highlight. This is probably a recurring theme about my career. So I left Borland and I started a company. And that was my second phase. And that was where I'm really an engineer who fell into being an entrepreneur, just trying to build tools. First product was JDB Insight that won awards for being the first kind of database transaction analysis tool. I went on to build JX Insight, which is a distributed tracing tool that came out in 2003. And then by 2008, I started to worry about whether it was all working with tracing. And that's when I started moving forward into different products. I won't get into that. We'll come back to that in a minute about tracing. And then the last 10 years of my career is kind of like tried to step away, but Andy keeps bringing me in because every time he posts something, it's like the observability in me keeps coming out. I need to talk to Andy again and tell him because it didn't work the last time. So those 10 years, I really kind of tried to take my experience in observability and build other systems because I think at the heart of it I'm a designer but a cybernetics kind of person, so I look for other solutions, well, other problems but are similar to observability. So I built the control tower, well, I designed the control tower for PostNL, which is the biggest logistic it's a national logistic company, parcel logistic company in Holland. And that was during COVID time, which was actually a very challenging time because they went from 1 million parcels to 2 million. So my career in the last 10 years has been jumping into other types of areas, but taking that technology or taking those concepts over, like largely in digital twins, which I think is an extension onto observability. I mean, that's the ultimate of what we're always trying to do. We probably don't do always the simulation part because we see that as very industrial, but I think at the end, observability, controllability, and operability are kind of the packaging that goes into what a digital twin is. So that's where I have been. That's the kind of those three periods of my career.
I think there's some interesting parallels now because I started my career in load testing with Segway software, where we built Silk Performer. We got acquired by Borland, so I was part of Borland for a little while, and that's why it's so funny because today when I did my research, I looked at your LinkedIn profile, and then LinkedIn reminded me, hey, you both worked at Borland, but you, I think William, you were a little bit before me because when did you leave?
I left, I think, in 2001. I think it was 2001. It's so yeah, 2000, maybe it was 2003, or did I join board in 2001? I don't look back that far on my LinkedIn. On my resume, I had to cut it because it's too long. Because the older you get in the industry, they don't want to. If you send them a 30-page resume, no one wants to read it. So
and nobody wants to know what you did when you were 16.
Yeah.
And then they even ask for your degree, and you're like, "Yeah, I have a degree, but it's 30 years old. Will that make it? Is that relevant?"
But the interesting parallels are because I remember when we did load testing, and then Borland came in, and then Bernd, right, our founder, he also pitched the idea to Borland about we are breaking systems, but we need something to get insights into the system. And then Borland also said, no, we don't need this. And then he founded Dynatrace. So it seems you and Bernd have kind of parallel tracks because you said you've always been an entrepreneur and you wanted to build new tools to help people. It's really, really interesting.
So if it wasn't for Borland, both of yours and Bernd's path wouldn't have taken where they did.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. Well, probably that's why it's very common. I mean, because we started both with the path thing. I mean, we had a little tug of war at the beginning because I actually brought path technology into JDB Insight, and when
Mm.
Dynatrace came out with path, I kept saying, "Hey, I had paths before." We would have a lot of fights about just that. I mean, of course, there were different ways of building it, and
Uh-huh.
nowadays, path. What does that mean? It's just a word,
Yeah, yeah.
but yeah, I think there was. I mean, we're engineers, at least product engineers like myself. We're trying to solve a problem, and a lot of the problems. And I think my problem for my own career was I was trying to solve the problem for William. And I would probably say I'm still trying to solve the problem for William because it's always the William that lives in the future and not so much the William that most people are like, oh, just engineers today. They are kind of like, I just to deal with what I need to get stuff done with what I have in front of me. And I'm trying to design a future because I don't want to do this any longer. I don't because I want to get to the next stage. So
Mm.
I think that's why I created the tools when I worked for Borland that work that I had to do at each of the customer sites, I just didn't want to keep repeating it. I wanted to automate it.
Yeah.
And the goal is always to automate yourself, to embed yourself into the product. So that was my vision is because Broaden would always send me out to customers. And I was like, if I put myself in a product, then they can just sell the product.
Mhm.
But that's actually, it sounds easy in paper, like I'll embed all my intelligence of what I do into a product, but that's not simply a rule. You can't just do rule based in a system. You realize later that your humanity is far bigger than just the intelligence of a few rule system or decision tree. You think you can boil down a product that will be quite effective for everyone. And it's really the context is always the issue. And today, if you think about it, context is everything. But that was
Hmm.
the part I kind of realized early in the product is that while it was good to do tracing, and by 2008, I think I got a bit worried about it because the issue was, it was just that and this was before everything went microservice, but the systems were quite complex. Distributed tracing had turned into tracing as well. So Dynatrace was also not distributed tracing. You were also profiling, hopping from one node to another. And the traces were detailed. There was a call trace, but some of those call traces would be spans or, hopping over. And every time I looked at those cold trees and expanded them, I just felt like this had to change. I really wanted the answers to come out because when people would ask me to look at a system, I always had this kind of sense of how to figure out what it was wrong. And I was quite quick at doing that, which was why I was very effective and valued. And and then when I would, when you see the tools and how people try to interact with them, I realized that that's not the way I work. So I don't click around like this, drilling down a cold tree. I'm scanning the large problem space. And
Mhm.
sometimes I drill down a little bit, but I know when not to drill down. But what I've seen, even when I worked for an Instant and we would give them, oh, and I didn't mention that I worked for Instant too, but
Mhm.
which was sold to IBM, but I would also see salespeople demoing, and I would always tell them, don't start clicking further deeper into the product because you get lost even in the demo, which is very important for fluid flow.
Yeah.
And that was the problem I had with tracing is that it it wasn't bringing the answer up to the surface. It had the data, but I didn't want data. I wanted insight. And even then, that was the question I kept saying. So every time I would get to insight or to a rule I would embed in a product, I realized that was not where I was trying to. It was a proxy for something else that I want to. And eventually, that's when I came about is that I wanted a signal. Of
Mhm.
course, we always talk about signs and symptoms and all, but I kept being fascinated. What am I trying to do with profiling? Well, I should say profiling is very different than observability, or at least to me. Observability is always about inference of status, not inference of how good something is performing in terms of performance profiling, but inference in terms of is this system stable, predictable? Is it going in? Is its trajectory the way I want it to be? And can what I see give me that answer? And that was where I came about is what is that question? What is the thing I'm trying to ask from the tool? And and I think my career has been always about that, getting up, trying to get up that hierarchy or triangle or steps to a higher level. And eventually I realized it was kind of I'd been reading about signals for animal signaling and then social intelligence or social cognitive,
Mm.
models. And then I realized everyone talks about situation status subjects in a very small manner. And in fact, that's the most effective way of what we're trying to do. So observability is really that. And that's where I changed my tune. Of course, before when I met Andy, when we were talking about distributed tracing, I was just getting worried about how complicated the traces were coming and how complicated the environments were. And I felt that wasn't going to work with uh, the cognitive load. And I think I have a kind of a low pain threshold for data
Mm.
or for too much data. And that's what drives you. There's always, to be an inventor, you have to feel a pain and a passion. There has to be a pain and you want to remedy it. And that turns into a passion looking for a solution.
Mm.
And that's what came about.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you about, the whole situational intelligence and
Yeah.
semiotics. But before that, there's one thing you said earlier, and I just want to have a quick clarification because you talked about the digital twin. So that observability is kind of like a digital twin. So was your thought that looking at logs, metrics, and traces, and maybe some events, that we are basically building a digital twin of the actual system, and this is what you refer to as the digital twin? So that
Yeah.
observability is okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So we always have to have some observability. I think the contention I have in the open telemetry is that we've not kind of changed what we mean by observability. I mean, we know the process of observability, which is collect information of some sort and then use that to create a model, and from that model to project, to make an assessment. So become aware of something, make assessments of it, and then anticipation. So I think it's always these three A's. And that awareness has been the open telemetry world. And awareness is it's important. You first have to have perception. That's humans, perception, cognition, and so that's comprehension and projection. And this is actually foundation for situational awareness. But the problem for I found with open telemetry is that we really stuck this to the yesteryear technologies of the current way we data collected, which was, and our systems have been evolving, but yet we're still talking about logs. We Distributed tracing moved a bit with the microservices, but we have different types of interactions now, especially with AI agents, and I don't think traceability is the right word for that. And in fact, one of the early workshops we had at distributed tracing, and I think I was invited to it before everything became open telemetry, I said to everyone that we had to take the tracing API and turn it into a workflow API. And now when I look at everything, it should have been the workflow API because when agents came along, workflows is a very important API for systems now. So and metrics, I mean, metrics will always be good. I mean, there's always some countings, but again, they're always a proxy or they're always something that you have to interpret. And that was the issue I had is that first of all, OpenTelemetry had picked on three, yeah, kind of dated technologies in terms of how to do something, had less context around it, and then we tried to hobble them all together into something. And it felt like OpenTelemetry was focused more on ingestion rather than intelligence gathering. It had no filter, maybe sampling, but that was really to address data problems, not say, tell me what's important in your system. Tell me what the signs are. And so it's easy to instrument something and add a counter, but it's very hard to think about how will that be interpreted and what's actually useful. Like say for a queue size there's a queue in every system, and you have a queue and you say your queue size is 90. Someone has to interpret 90. What does that mean? What is the queue limit? And that's the problem I always had. And I think I have an aversion to numbers in that way, is it's not qualitative, it's a
Hmm.
quantity. And the qualitative, it has to be an interpretation. So And we think as APM products or observability products or data analytics products that we're going to fix this later. But we don't fix it later. If it's not fixed at the source, it becomes data and it stays dormant in stores. And the engineers who are tasked with trying to understand that later really don't have that means to turn those numbers into qualitative science.
Mhm.
So my view was that that will never change. Its observability or open telemetry had made it easy to instrument, but it actually narrowed down what the type of instruments were. It didn't allow for new experimentation, like bringing in science, bringing in a semiotic way of approaching it, and making that flow through the pipeline, as opposed to what I would say is tracing, which is very profile oriented, even though we have now a profile silo, but it's very profile oriented in terms of execution and timing, and not telling you status of something, or at least the quality of a service. You have to interpret it with a number. So, and that was the thing I had a lot with OpenTelemetry. It didn't do, and then of course it grew itself from one silo tracing, and then it became logging, and then it became this, and there was no unification underneath. Except when we got to a collector, it kind of looked like everything was coming something into one runtime, and where you could probably process a little bit. But I felt that we should have put in a proper Sentry runtime, an infobus or some sort, where we could do a lot of pre-processing in there before it's shipped out anywhere.
Mhm.
And allow intelligence to be in the applications and the runtimes, and then move out the signals for, capture information where it makes sense, reason about it at that what I call near time as opposed to real time, which is never really real time. And near time is this: I'm near to the time of when it happened, not just near in terms of temporal, but spatial. So that was the challenge I had with the open telemetry. Any kind of new instrument or new silo, because it's very silo oriented in the way it approaches things, is a new specification. It's a new set of APIs. It's a new, nearly a complete implementation, and then it's a new backend for everyone. It's
Yeah,
all the
but
way.
I wanna, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let me also give you,
Yeah.
first of all, thank you so much for the way you see it. And I think OpenTelemetry, they really just wanted to solve the data capturing, right? They never said we are going to reinvent observability or whatever. They just said there's many vendors out there, and why do we have 5 different vendors that have an agent that is
Yeah.
proprietary? Why can't we just standardize on how we are capturing the known signals of observability?
Yeah.
And I think the Open Telemetry Collector was actually, I'm not sure when it came in, but I think it came in rather early, for some of these things, right? Extracting insights from traces, because in the Open Telemetry Collector, you have a processors and you can extract information. You can also there enforce some of your rules, right?
Yeah.
So because you can say, I don't need to capture every trace because this is too much information. I want to convert spans into some metrics, and I may want to even convert some of them to signals to an alert in case I see that there's too many messages sent into a queue.
Yeah.
Um, and I guess, open telemetry, and I agree this is a misconception by many. Open telemetry is only focusing on how we are capturing the signals and how we're transporting them to a
Yeah.
backend, but not what is done with the data. And so what I would like just to validate from you, you said this is was a missed opportunity instead of just standardizing on something we've been doing for the last 10, 20 years, meaning capturing logs, metrics, and traces.
Mm.
Why not think ahead and rethink on what is it really that we need to do in the app to not just get a log, a metric, and a span or a trace, but to understand better. And this is now the conversation I want to have around
Yeah.
situational intelligence.
Yeah.
But my question is, does a developer that develops an application, does a developer know, do they have to know what is the right queue length? What is the right CPU time that a method executes? What are some of these examples? Like
Yeah.
what do you envision that what does modern future observability situational awareness look like?
Yeah. So the way I go about solving this is the to try to say, don't okay, the default is not to take quantity numbers and transmit them is send basically a token because we use language, so we have languages and we have words that refer to things. They don't refer to a quantity. So when we say someone's got a temperature, a high temperature, it's high. We don't know what that is or what we have, but we can communicate high temperature to someone. So when we say something has got an overflow, did we need to know that length, that overflow, that array, or that queue, or some kind of resource? So my goal was to kind of eliminate as much as possible the numbers, or at least make them secondary, and to bring in a qualitative answer to that signal. If so, we don't tell people, we don't send numbers to each other, we send signals, gestures. And this is where my analysis was. I was trying to imagine an ecosystem of all these microservices, but I always imagined them like agents. And I was like, each of them is judging each other. This was also one of the things I had a problem with in observability, is that the rules were very at the end, at the actual service itself, never judging from which service was talking to which. Your sensitivity, one service might have a higher sensitivity to latency or to failure than another service talking to. So if A and B and C are talking, it's a relational, and this might have been my time when I went in the whole Buddhism and everything's connected and all. But I realized the reality is it's like a social network. A signal from someone like a friend is going to be interpreted different from a signal like an enemy. Of course, we don't have like enemies and friends in software, but we do have promises, and we have expectations, and those expectations are slightly different from each of the angles. And we have tolerances. We have services that can do retry, or clients, which are services generally themselves. They have they might have tolerance for errors. Well, other systems might not have that. They might not have put in some kind of retry mechanism, or, the hysterics or other kind of technologies that they use for that, or adaptive control. So the thing I was trying to do is to get more to this language of communicating as opposed to the numbers, which is later, no one's going to do something. And what's interesting is on the open telemetry, and you said it, that the collector was there quite early, and there was a capability to do something. But you're doing it with a trace and a metric. And the person that's in the collector writing something is not the person that wrote the metric, the counter. It doesn't even know to understand it, interpret it. And it might require a few other numbers at that time to turn it into something meaningful and send it along. So the belief that people will later apply intelligence or analytics to it and get it right is not, it's not valid. It doesn't work in practice.
But can I ask you a question on this?
Yeah.
Isn't the whole idea on why we have it like this, the separation of concerns, that somebody knows how to capture information? Like I can take, to bring a body example, like body temperature, right? Or let's take a car example. I can have a speedometer that tells me, am I going 80, 100 or 200 kilometers?
Yeah.
Depending on in which country I'm driving, 200 might be too fast. In Germany, on some autobahns, 200 is okay. But if I'm the engineer that creates that engine, why do I need to know that 200 in Germany is okay, but in Austria not? Isn't that a separation of concern where I say, here's what I've built, here are the signals, but depending on where and how you operate it, you can then define your rules that alert you in case we're going too fast.
Yeah. Okay. So the problem comes down to context. And my view is that we're not very good at rebuilding the context. So that works in a remote system. Why you would do that, I'm not sure. But if you were to remotely send a signal to someone else, it needs not only to know your speed, it needs to know your geolocation, and then later on apply some kind of rules and rebuild the context. That's not always how our systems are working. Unless we send a lot of payload on it. A lot of context in the payload, but that is valid there. But you see what you're doing is you're trying to recreate the context. So to interpret that number, you have to create the context. And I always found that wasn't like, that's what a typical digital twin would be. But we're not very good at creating that that context. And no matter how much we do, we tend to do it by structural, but structural is not the same as context there. There's many aspects to context. And so I just feel we can never get that enough context. And it's far better if I just say, like, so when I'm driving a car now, it actually gives me a beep. It gives me a
Mhm.
signal there and then on the road that I'm driving. So I don't have to think about what the speed is. Well, of course, I'm kind of got a guess, and sometimes the lights or there's a new sign, a new runway, and they change it. But I get a beep. I get immediate signal. And that's because it knows where I am at that moment, and it says, okay, it's, of course, it's downloaded some kind of information to tell it, but it's giving me a signal. And that feedback is straight away there.
Mhm.
So it's already translating into that signal. And I was just trying to say that's what we're always looking for, is that signal that says you've gone over. I don't care about how far it is or the number it is. I care about I've actually broke something, or I broke a limit, I've exceeded some threshold, and I want to react there and then. So part of the signals was to short circuit that, get it happening where the context was, the near time, and get the engineer who knows that, who's built that system, to be the one that puts that in. So if you're
Mhm.
writing a queue component and you've already got a capacity limit, and you know that the capacity is exceeded, and the algorithm itself, you don't want to say the number, you want to say I've
Yes.
got a capacity challenge, and that saves them. That's them using their intelligence in their code. Now, the person that's using that library might understand queuing, but he might not understand how quickly you can refill, or how quickly you can expand. He's not,
Mhm.
and he's never going to be able to keep up to date with your implementation. So the thing there is to signal that I'm doing this. I'm doing something that's not normal.
Mhm.
I'm deviating, an important signal. You can indicate signals of outcome and operations. We already do that even with code. And I'm just saying there's different signals that are very important to leading up to something. Symptoms of something is about to happen, and they're
Mhm.
never going to be regurgitated or reconstructed
Yeah. So.
far away, both data and also developer and context and time. So, and that was just being practical. In fact, while people might think I'm being far out by going semiotics, I'm being his most practical way of solving that problem. And
Mhm.
by solving it there, we now turn observability into kind of like a large language model, because it doesn't deal with numbers. We already know the large language model is not very good with numbers. But if you turn everything into a token, it's a sign system. It's basically tokenized patterns of words. You might not know what they mean, but they have meaning from the person that generated it. It was a
Mhm.
sign that had, and over time we learn signage, even though where we might, the first time we see a sign, we don't understand it, but
Mhm.
someone tells us later, or we use that sign to interpret when that person does this, that indicates there's a problem, because you later on see that when he did that sign, later on you see an action that followed that sign, and your mind immediately associates that. If you have a dog, you know how quickly they pick up on signs and what follows that. So
Mhm.
like you get them, even though they don't understand words, you say a sound like food, or do you want something, or like, and you go to the kitchen, they're already looking where to go, and they make that association quite quickly. And
Mhm.
that's the kind of what I was trying to do with the signage system, is to capture that in just as small as a word that means so much more than that. And it's a bit, if you think about emojis, they're like signage in themselves. And we can literally read them quite compressed. There's a compressed way, but there's emotion to it. So that's another thing. If you come back down to emotion when someone says angry, it's very hard to know what angry is in every person. But that's a universal concept, even though the what's happening inside the body is a quite complex process. It's described just with a simple token.
Mhm.
That was my view: is can we get this streaming of tokens? And maybe this is where I was coming back to complex event processing. If we can turn it into that, I can start looking for patterns, and then in that of cyclic patterns, because that's what we're always looking for, is looking for these cyclic patterns, and then later on saying that this one was a bad one. Sometimes you don't know it at the time when you see it, but later when you do a diagnostics, you're not looking for numbers. You're not saying when it goes over this number, it goes up here and then it goes down there. You're just saying, if I see this sequence of these words together, I know what comes next, which is like reading a book, which is like looking at a movie. And that was where I was trying to go with the
Mhm.
semiotics. And okay, so then we get to situational awareness before we run out of time. So yeah, so
Let me
I
just have
got
one more quick clarifying question. If I understand this correctly, in the world that you envision for software engineers, instead of thinking about which metric, which trace, which log to emit a token that
yeah,
expresses like how I am. It could say thumbs up, I'm good, send me
yeah,
more. It could say, I don't know, right now I feel like
maybe,
something is wrong, and then don't send me
yeah,
anything else. Now, here's the million dollar question. How would I, as an engineer, come up with a thumbs up, a so la la, or a bottom? Because I need to still make this decision in my own code based on, am I crossing a certain threshold? I guess yes or no, right? I see too many
yeah,
messages coming in.
yeah.
That means I still use numbers and then compare it to a threshold and then just convert all of that into symbol sign language. Is this?
Yeah, well, okay. In some of the thresholds ones, yes. But if we actually are dealing, even though sometimes we think we're dealing with numbers, we're dealing with codes. Take HTTP. There are codes. They're numbers, but we know they mean good,
Yeah.
bad, ugly. So we actually got behaviors. It tells you when it says, I'm dropping, I'm shedding load, or
Hmm.
here's an okay response. So there's codes everywhere. And what I was trying to do is
Yeah.
create a universal code set that didn't depend on the technology. It said, here is now HTTP gives you vast set. It's a bigger small sign set than good, bad. And you either want you executed or you failed. That's the basic level of things work, things didn't work. But
Yeah.
HTTP does more than that. It tells you, hey, I'm redirecting you. It tells you I'm dropping your load, I'm dropping load because I'm dropping a packet or a request. So it is actually trying to communicate with you. So the way I was imagining at that time was all of these services trying to communicate to each other, not just binary, yes,
Yeah.
no, but more context. And that was the science there. And so let's come back to then how
I just want to
semiotics.
say, I think this is a really good explanation, right? With the HTTP status codes, I
Yeah,
think because I know when I call a service and a 200 comes back, I know everything is good. If it's a 404, I know I'm not authenticated. If
yeah,
it's a 3XX, I know I'm getting redirected. There's other things as well. So I think
yeah,
that's
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
But then we are already in some respects, obviously, right? We're already doing this. But I think what you're suggesting is using this universally so that every service, every app can just express their status, not with a number or numbers that I need to then centrally
Yeah.
compare, but that everybody has enough awareness to say, this is how I feel. This is what I can do right now.
Yes, yeah, because we do have, if you look at computation, there are universal primitives. I mean, I found 16 in service to service interaction. So you make a call, you respond, there's a failure or success. There's you schedule something, so you accept it, but you don't do it. You accept the work and you suspend the work, you resume the work. So I came up with like 16 primitives for any agent to agent to communicate each other to do work. And people have actually done this with language. They've actually looked at there's a thing called speech act theory, which is about understanding language in terms of a number of primitives. And Mark Purges also did this with promise theory, where he talks about promises and all. So I
Mhm.
was looking for that. And the reason to do that is they translate into this kind of language of service or language of actors or agents, depending. You can have multiple mini languages, but to hide the underlying infrastructure of whether it's a JDBC error or whether it's a HTTP, because they all have their different error codes or their different ways of expressing something. But also, you could just write your own component and you could say, yeah, I good, bad, ugly. If that was your universal, if you wanted just to be as primitive on good, bad. So
Mhm.
this comes down to semiotics or to situational awareness. Because think about what we're doing there. We're just saying there is a subject in the world. There's a thing we know, and it's always subjects are generally nested inside each other. So like an organizational system. And like microservices are in containers, subjects are in there, services even can be decomposed into entry points or whatever method they're calling. And I call them subjects. There's something that's identifiable, normally because it's not transient, even though it's transient in terms of the process is created, but it's not transient in terms of my reference. I know there's a microservice called work orders or a scheduler or something. I don't know where it exists, but I know it, and that's a subject. So to me, there's the concept of there are things out there that I'm aware of, and while they might have reincarnations, I see them that continuity exists. And those subjects are trying to tell me something. They're doing something, and or there's change happening to them, and that change I need to understand. And to me, that's then they have to talk in the terms of a sign language. Now they can use a universal primitive sign language of yes, no, or they can use more expressive sign language, or even invent their own sign language, but a minimal set of signs. And they express that sign. And how they do that is they emit basically, I'm a subject, here's who I am, here's my sign, this word. You, of course, you have to understand what that sign is, but there is a word, and whatever that behavior underneath, that's the contract that will stay always there. They're telling you something, even though how they calculate it, how it happens, or the how it's derived is just that word, and it will. That's the contract. So we have contracts for APIs. I'm saying we have contracts for observability, and we kind of, as I said, we already have that with HTTP code. So everyone's invented some kind of code to indicate something. So we already had that. So that's the first stage. Think of the world that it has subjects, they have a sign, and they emit it as a signal. And the signal is basically, hey, it's me. I've got a sign to tell you. And here. Now, someone can subscribe to that. So now we're coming down to there are things in the world that are seeing other things doing things, which is like social intelligence. If I'm an ape and there's another ape and if I see a predator and I start screaming, or then they all get the sign. So I'm broadcasting signs. My body and my actions emit something, which is a great way of communicating something that I'm seeing. So now we get to that sometimes a sign is not just about me, that I'm also a source of a sign, and sometimes that source is myself, and sometimes that source is someone else. So if we think about social networks, in social networks, we are judging each other. Yeah, if someone comes to you, trust is a very important thing in social networks. But trust comes about by, first of all, vigilance, surveillance of the person that you've delegated to, but also people telling you about that person, whether they're trustworthy. So we are picking up signals from everywhere. And when I looked at microservices or distributed systems, I seen this collection of agents communicating with each other, whatever which way they do it, messaging, event-based or RPC or file-based or anything. They're all trying to coordinate work together, but they're also judging each other. And they have the ability to judge. They have the ability to tell themselves what they're doing and also what they see. So sometimes you have a signal that says, I'm a source, but the subject of the signal is someone else. And I want to tell you what I think about it, which is a sign. So what you get then is, at one level, you get signals that are very factual, very kind of close to what we have with metrics. They're just telling you about the source itself, like I'm having a good day or bad day. But then they come to another level of judgment, assessments. And this is where I realized that we take signals from various people and we make assessments and we judge them and we emit them. So we do this on LinkedIn. We might say that person's not nice, that person's nice. Elon Musk is down or up today, whatever they're doing. But we're judging their action. So that someone does something immediate, we judge them, we emit a sign about that person. So what you see then is you have the low level stimulus gets interpreted by subjects, their own behavior. They tell people what they've done, but they tell it in a language that's understandable, universal. That goes to other people that are other services or judge subjects, and they're judging other subjects. And then they make a judgment. They might judge even themselves, but they're also judging others and they emit it. But what they emit is also a signal. And what you get then is you get this higher level of crunching numbers down or crunching low level stimulus into very informative information. Because what you get, while this might be an explosion because everyone's talking about each other, we pull that collective intelligence of what I'm getting from my environment, what that person, what that subject told me about that subject, and what I'm seeing when I interact with that subject. I turn that into a kind of like a scorecard. It's just a quick way. It's a simple way of doing it. Of course, you would do various different models, and you turn that in, and then I make a judgment, and that also it changes my behavior if I'm a service. But I can also emit that information, and that it goes up to something else, which could be looking at the whole collective. Is everyone satisfied with each other? So I'm trying to build up this kind of layers of collective intelligence at very high levels where we're thinking cluster society. Is everyone happy? How are people voting? And I'm trying to do that at a distributed environment and building this kind of language. So I see basic signs, I see status. It's always awareness signs. Tell me something. Tell me about operation outcome or some kind of threshold breach. Second level, make me assessment. You can assess yourself, which is I'm a queue and I'm not really good because I'm always queued up. And that's where you're consuming your own signs. Your own library is emitting signs. You're consuming it, and you see yourself 5 minutes queued up with no, at the threshold. Then you say, I'm overloaded. Yeah, I'm not. And you might even see your divergent. So you're able to judge yourself, but others have the same sign set, and they can make a judgment because they might say, well, I would judge you differently. And the reason I came about that is because I realized it's very hard to say definitively one way or another something is good or bad. It depends on your perspective. So when I was trying to think about what I was doing with humanity and substrates, is I'm going to say allow multiple observers observing other subjects. So an observer is a subject too. But they can also observe others, and everyone can have different opinions, and then we get this kind of voting system, overall schemes there. And then we've gone from assessment, awareness to assessment, and then we come to anticipation. But before anticipation, we have to think is what are we trying to do? We're trying to think of projection. Something is going to happen next, or something is happening, but I don't really see it, or I'm thinking, yeah, it's coming. And what we do there is situation, because a situation is there are a number of subjects who are talking about the status, and this has been going on for a bit longer. And I'm looking at this pattern at a status level, at a subject level, at a collective level, and I'm seeing something unfold. And that's situation awareness, where we're now saying it's unfolding and it's probably going to get worse or it's going to better. And this is where you get into diverging, converging, and also judging the situation, whether it's critical, it's unusual, it's something new that came along, I'm investigating, I'm watching it, needs a bit more attention, or I need to escalate. And that's situation. So situation is status over a period of time. Status is signals or signs over a period of time. And that's the 3 levels of the concepts that I've been trying to build, is look at that. And I think then, and I know this is probably crazy, we could just have eventually one dashboard, which I know everyone doesn't want to hear, like the one dashboard to rule everything. But it really only needs a few concepts in it, not traces, not metrics, not different types of things. It just needs to say there are subjects in the world. They're hierarchical because subjects are always embedded in each other. Subjects, I have signs, but I'm not interested. I'm interested in the status. The status is judged by different subjects. Then there's a situation evolving. And that's the primitive language we would only need. All observability engineers would only need to understand 5 concepts, I think 5: subject, sign, signal, status, and situation. And that would be the end of dashboards.
Well, William, I think this was an episode where we had a guest that had the most percentage of speaking time, because obviously you have a lot of stuff. And I gotta say, I need to process all of this. I look at your humanary.io website, folks. We definitely, make sure if you're interested in this, to check out the websites, the paper. There's a lot of great stuff there. You also have your substrates on GitHub for everybody to try out.
Open source. Yeah,
open source. Yeah, I still think it's you said in the beginning. Sometimes you are a little too far ahead into the future.
Yeah.
And maybe this is also what this is now.
Yes.
I think the reason why OpenTelemetry is so popular is because developers over 20, 30, 40 years know what a log is. They know what a metric is, and many start to understand what the trace is. So that's why the hurdle is very low to get this in.
Yeah.
But I really think, I mean, it gave this, at least me, gave it this a lot of food for thought.
Yeah.
But I need to process this.
Yeah. Okay, but before you go, Andreas, when the next time you're talking to a human, think about, am I tracing him or am I looking at the signs?
Yeah, of
Am I
course,
judging him? Am I seeing a situation? You will find out it's actually far more universal. Every person in the world would understand situational awareness, but they wouldn't understand distributed tracing or open telemetry.
Yeah. But as an SRE, a site reliability engineer, I also, when I'm responsible for a service, I probably ask and look at response time, queue. I ask for what are your critical signals, and then I learn what the normal behavior is, and I see if there's abnormal behavior. And I basically charge based on what I learned from the past. I obviously factor in the connections that one service has to another. And that's, I think, also what, including us, but other observability vendors have been trying to do based on the signals we have available, which is logs, metrics, traces. William, I'm sorry that I have to cut you off, but as I mentioned earlier, I need to rush and help somebody out here. Brian, mind-blowing.
Brian is just been sitting there like, what the heck? What is happening?
I think you're mute, Brian, because I can't hear you. Somehow you're mute. It even blew away his microphone here. Here we go.
Connected. I was going to say there were so many times that I had stuff I wanted to questions I wanted to hop in with, but even Andy would hop in before me. So I was like, you know what? Trying to process all the information. Yeah, no, I think there's definitely a lot to process there, William. I do second Andy with the idea that I think this is what the observability tools have been working towards, or something like this. I do think, though, that there is something beyond maybe what we're all focusing on that might be that step beyond that, which is what I want to try to process and understand more. Like, if we're trying to get here with this, which sounds very in line with where you're going, obviously you're seeing some gap from the goal to the next phase after that. And I think that's where I need to process to look into, like, understanding what that part is, right? Because again, real quick with the idea of Elon Musk, right? Because you brought him up, is Elon Musk acting normal today? That all comes from the context of, are you an Elon Musk fan or an Elon Musk detractor? Maybe he's normal crazy, right? But it's still me interpreting that. So that's still that higher level platform. And to me, I think that I kind of got stuck on the idea of making those decisions when you were talking about OTel, making the decision at the gathering level, as opposed to ship it off, take everything in, and make that. So yeah, a lot to process. Definitely interesting thoughts. And Andy, I know you got to run, so I will not babble anymore. Tons of interesting thoughts. I think.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, and I'm glad we
with
did
us
this.
or you, or I don't even think it's an us or you. I think this is like more of a collaboration of, like, let's see where this goes. But I think no matter what, it's definitely opening a whole new set of doors of, like, okay, what are we missing, and what might be alternatives for the future on that. So great stuff.
And William, all the best. Keep us posted. I'm sure I'll see you anyway on social media. I hope I also get to meet you in real life again at some point. Keep us posted, and happy to have you back maybe in a couple of months from now and see how far you've moved into the future.
Enjoy your meetup. Thank you, everybody.
Cheers. Thank you. Bye. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.